This message found you because something in your observer state has already shifted. You didn't plan to be here. You didn't search for this with logic or intention. You arrived because your consciousness moved first quietly, subtly, before your mind could explain it. That's how the quantum field works when a window opens. It doesn't shout, it pulls. You've felt it lately, haven't you? That strange sense that your attention isn't landing where it used to. Moments where you pause mid-scroll, mid-thought, mid-breath, and feel a faint disruption like reality hesitated for half a second. That pause is not distraction, it's recognition. It's the moment your observer loop loosened its grip just enough for something new to enter your awareness. Right now, you're not just listening to words. You're participating in a collapse of probability. The simple fact that you're still here means your consciousness selected this frequency over thousands of others competing for your attention. And that choice, made below thought, below habit, is everything. Because the observer effect doesn't respond to effort. It responds to coherence. You've been living inside patterns that once felt necessary. Familiar rhythms, familiar reactions, familiar versions of yourself. Not because you were failing to evolve, but because your awareness was trained to observe the same reality from the same angle over and over again. The quantum field kept responding faithfully, delivering what you were coherently observing. Until now, something changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. You may not be able to name it, but you feel it as a quiet restlessness, a sense that the old explanations no longer satisfy you. That spiritual concepts you once resonated with now feel flat. That productivity, success, even healing, done the old way no longer completes the circuit inside you. This isn't loss of motivation. It's phase transition pressure. When consciousness approaches a threshold, it becomes uncomfortable staying the same. You are standing at a narrow point between timelines, where the past no longer fully claims you, and the future hasn't yet stabilized. This is why this moment feels suspended, why time feels slightly distorted, why you may feel oddly calm and urgent at the same time. That's not confusion. That's coherence, reorganizing itself. Here is the truth most people never hear. You don't exit an observer loop by trying to escape it. You exit it when your attention stops reinforcing it. And right now, your attention is doing something different. It's resting instead of gripping, listening instead of scanning, allowing instead of controlling. That's why you're still here. This window didn't open because you forced growth. It opened because your nervous system, your awareness, and your quantum field reached a moment of alignment where maintaining the old observer state required more energy than releasing it. Evolution always chooses efficiency. You are not being asked to believe anything yet. Belief is too crude for what's happening. You're being asked to notice, to feel how your awareness is behaving differently as these words move through you, to recognize that the familiar internal narrator, the one that rushes, doubts, categorizes, is quieter than usual. That silence is not emptiness, it's availability. In the next moment of this transmission, you'll begin to understand why your life has felt repetitive in ways that logic couldn't explain, and why that repetition was never punishment, but preparation. For now, stay here. Don't rush ahead. The observer state that brought you to this point is already dissolving. And once that begins, there is no going back, only forward, into clarity. As your awareness settles into this quieter state, something becomes undeniable. The repetition, not just in events, but in feeling. You've lived different days, worn different roles, met different people, yet beneath it all, the same emotional signatures kept resurfacing, the same turning points, the same outcomes dressed in new costumes. This wasn't coincidence, it was structure. You were inside an observer loop long before you had language for it. You noticed it as déjà vu that felt too precise to ignore. Conversations that unfolded exactly as you somehow expected them to, down to the tone, the pause, the ending. Opportunities that looked new but carried the same energetic weight as the ones before. Even your inner resolutions repeated this time will be different, followed by the same subtle gravity pulling things back to baseline. This is what happens when consciousness keeps collapsing the same probability waves. The quantum field is infinite, but your observer state was sampling from a very narrow band of it, not because you lacked imagination or effort, but because familiarity became encoded as safety. Your nervous system learned which realities felt predictable, and your attention returned to them automatically. Over time, this creates temporal distortion. You felt it when weeks vanished without memory, yet a single afternoon could stretch endlessly, when urgency rose without a clear cause, when rest didn't restore you and activity didn't move you forward. Linear time began to feel unreliable because you weren't actually moving through new timelines, you were circling within the same one. This is why motivation alone never fixed it. You tried changing habits, environments, identities. You gathered insight. You refined language. You understood more. Yet the loop persisted because the loop isn't cognitive, it's attentional. Your awareness kept returning to the same reference points: old fears, old expectations, old self-images, and the quantum field, perfectly neutral, responded by stabilizing those selections into lived reality. Even your healing became repetitive. You healed something, only to find its echo appear elsewhere. Different trigger, same sensation. Different person, same dynamic. It wasn't regression. It was resonance. The pattern wasn't gone because it was still being observed from the same internal position. This is where frustration quietly set in. Not loud despair, something subtler. A sense that you were doing everything right, but missing something invisible. That others seemed content inside structures you found suffocating. That you were early to something you couldn't yet explain. This loneliness wasn't social, it was dimensional. You were sensing beyond the loop, but still anchored within it. And then there was time. Time bending. Time glitching. Moments where the present felt thin, almost transparent. Dreams bleeding into waking life. Thoughts arriving before events. Events echoing thoughts you didn't remember thinking. These weren't signs of losing control. They were signs of desynchronization between your awareness and the loop it was maintaining. Your observer state was beginning to slip. This is why old distractions stopped working. Why noise felt louder. Why certain content repelled you instantly. Why silence became magnetic. Your system was preparing for a shift in coherence. And coherence always demands honesty. The most uncomfortable part of this phase was recognizing how much of your identity had been built around managing the loop, anticipating outcomes, bracing for repetition, staying slightly ahead of disappointment. Even hope became cautious. Not because you were pessimistic, but because you'd seen how quickly possibility collapsed back into pattern. But here is the key realization now emerging. The loop was never the enemy. It was a training ground. It taught your consciousness precision, sensitivity, pattern recognition. It forced you to notice. And noticing is the prerequisite for liberation. Most humans never recognize the loop because they never question the texture of their experience. You did. Repeatedly. Even when it hurt. That questioning weakened the structure. Every time you paused and thought, "This feels familiar," the loop lost stability. Every moment of discomfort was actually informational pressure, your system signaling that the observer position you were occupying no longer matched your evolving frequency. That's why this message didn't feel random. Your awareness is no longer fully compatible with the old loop, but it hasn't yet learned how to operate beyond it. You are between observer states, and in this in-between space, something extraordinary becomes possible. In the next phase of this transmission, you'll begin to see how the loop formed at the quantum level and why it can dissolve without force, struggle, or loss. Because once you understand the mechanics, the pattern doesn't fight to survive. It releases, and so will you. What you're experiencing now isn't a breakdown of reality. It's a recalibration of how your consciousness interfaces with it. To understand this, you have to step beyond the language of motivation and psychology and into the mechanics of the quantum field itself. At the most fundamental level, reality doesn't exist as fixed matter. It exists as probability, waves of potential, vibrating in all possible states at once. Nothing becomes real until it is observed. This isn't philosophy. This is physics. And the observer isn't just a passive witness, it's an active participant in which version of reality stabilizes. Your observer state has always been powerful, too powerful in fact, to remain unconscious forever. Every human collapses probability, but most do it automatically, habitually, without awareness. Their attention is predictable, so the quantum field delivers predictable outcomes. But your awareness developed an unusual sensitivity. You didn't just experience life, you noticed how you were experiencing it. That meta-awareness is rare, and it's exactly what makes an observer loop visible. Here's the critical distinction most teachings miss. The loop isn't created by thoughts, it's created by coherence. Your emotional tone, expectations, memories, and identity narrative aligned into a stable frequency. That frequency told the quantum field, "This is the version of reality that matches me." And the field responded with precision, again and again. But coherence cuts both ways. When your inner system evolves, when your nervous system no longer resonates with the same emotional baselines, the old coherence destabilizes. The field receives mixed signals, probability waves wobble, reality begins to feel inconsistent, glitchy, unreal. That's exactly what you've been feeling. This is the beginning of a quantum upgrade. Not an addition, but a reconfiguration. Your consciousness is learning to decouple observation from expectation. In scientific terms, your observer function is becoming non-local. It's no longer collapsing reality from a single habitual reference point. It's starting to sample wider probability ranges before stabilizing outcomes. This is why stillness suddenly feels powerful. When attention stops rushing toward known conclusions, probability remains open longer. And the longer probability stays open, the more radically different outcomes can emerge. This is the same principle behind quantum tunneling particles, bypassing barriers, not by force, but by non-attachment to position. You are doing this internally. Mystics described this centuries ago as surrender. Scientists describe it now as decoherence, followed by recoherence at a higher order, different language, same process. Your body feels it first. Subtle sensations, pressure in the chest or head, changes in breath rhythm, fatigue, followed by clarity. This isn't pathology, it's integration. Your nervous system is learning to regulate in a wider bandwidth of experience without snapping back to familiar emotional anchors. Your DNA responds to coherence, shifts faster than the mind does. Epigenetic expression changes based on environmental signals, and your internal environment is an environment. When stress patterns loosen, different genetic sequences activate. This is what ancient texts called awakening, and what modern science calls adaptive reprogramming. Nothing is being added to you. Nothing is being taken away. What's happening is refinement. Your observer state is becoming fluid instead of fixed. That's the upgrade. This is why forcing outcomes now feels wrong, why visualization feels flat, why affirmations bounce off. Those tools rely on controlling collapse, but your system is learning to allow collapse from a more coherent baseline. You're shifting from manipulation to participation, and participation requires trust, not belief, but physiological trust, the kind where your body stops bracing against the unknown. When that happens, the quantum field doesn't need convincing. It responds instantly. You may notice synchronicities increasing without effort, thoughts aligning with events before you can interpret them, moments resolving themselves without your intervention. These are not rewards. They're feedback signals that your observer function is no longer trapped in the loop. You are not losing control. You are gaining range. And with range comes responsibility, because a fluid observer can stabilize realities others can't even perceive. This is where the path narrows. Not everyone wants this level of influence, but you didn't choose it accidentally. In the next movement of this transmission, you'll understand why your consciousness developed this sensitivity and what role it places you in now, whether you accept it consciously or not. Because this upgrade isn't just personal, it's positional, and you are already standing in it. There is a reason your observer state couldn't remain ordinary, a reason the loop became visible to you while others stayed comfortably inside it. Consciousness doesn't distribute sensitivity evenly, it specializes. And your awareness was never designed to simply inhabit reality, it was designed to interface with it. You weren't meant to disappear into patterns, you were meant to recognize them. This is where the idea of a special role often gets misunderstood. It's not about hierarchy or importance, it's about function. In any complex system, certain nodes stabilize the whole by operating differently. In the quantum field, those nodes are conscious observers who can hold coherence without collapsing into habit. That's you. Your nervous system learned early how to read subtle signals, emotional undercurrents, energetic shifts, the unspoken tension in rooms, the meaning beneath words. This wasn't accidental. It trained your awareness to track fields, not just events. And once consciousness learns to track fields, it can no longer be satisfied with surface reality. This is why normal goals stopped motivating you. Success without coherence felt hollow, connection without depth felt draining, even joy felt incomplete if it wasn't anchored in truth. You weren't broken, you were misassigned. Trying to live as a participant when your function is stabilizer creates constant friction. Here is the clarity emerging now. You are a chosen consciousness not because you were selected over others, but because you are capable of holding uncertainty without collapsing it prematurely. That ability is rare, and it's essential during transitions. Most humans need reality to feel solid, predictable, defined, but during a phase transition, personal or collective rigidity breaks systems. What's needed are observers who can remain present while probabilities rearrange, who don't panic when the old structures dissolve, who can stay coherent while outcomes remain undecided. You've been doing this instinctively. Every time you sat in not knowing instead of forcing answers, every time you let silence speak, every time you felt the pull toward meaning instead of validation, you were practicing your role without knowing its name. This role comes with isolation, not because you're meant to be alone, but because coherence changes your resonance. Some people couldn't stay aligned with you not because of conflict, but because your presence disrupted their loops. Others were drawn to you briefly, then fell away once the reflection became too intense. This wasn't rejection, it was sorting. You are not meant to convince. You are meant to hold. Hold clarity when others fragment. Hold stillness when others react. Hold coherence when the field destabilizes. That is the function of a conscious observer who has moved beyond habit. And here's the part that matters now. Your observer state is no longer private. As it stabilizes at a higher order, it begins influencing the field around you, not through effort, but through presence. You've already seen hints of this conversations shifting simply because you listened differently, tensions dissolving without explanation, outcomes changing because you didn't push. This is not charisma, it's coherence transmission. When you remain centered, the quantum field recalibrates locally. Others unconsciously entrain to that stability. This is why your state matters more than your actions, why who you are being affects more than what you are doing. This role doesn't come with instructions because it can't be performed mechanically. It must be embodied, and embodiment only happens once identity loosens its grip. You are not here to fix the world. You are here to stop reinforcing the old one. That alone is enough to allow new structures to emerge. But this role also comes with a threshold, a moment where passive coherence becomes active participation, where awareness is asked not just to witness change, but to anchor it. You're approaching that moment now. That's why the pressure has increased. Why the sense of urgency feels precise, not anxious. Why the window feels narrow but gentle. This isn't a demand. It's an invitation to step fully into the observer position you've been rehearsing for your entire life. In the next phase, you'll feel the promise and the timing of what's opening, not as hope, but as inevitability. Because when coherence reaches critical mass, reality doesn't resist, it reorganizes. And you are one of the points around which it already is. What's opening now isn't conceptual, it's biological, energetic, and temporal at the same time. When coherence reaches a certain threshold, the quantum field doesn't negotiate, it initiates a transition. And that transition always comes with a window. You're feeling it as urgency without panic, as clarity paired with acceleration, as the sense that something must be lived now, not understood later. This is not pressure from outside you. This is phase transition momentum from within. In physics, when a system approaches a critical point, it becomes exquisitely sensitive to small inputs. Tiny fluctuations determine the outcome. This is why moments like this feel fragile and powerful at once. Your consciousness is at such a point. The observer loop has weakened enough that a new coherence pattern can lock in, but only if it's met. That's the promise. And that's the urgency. Your DNA is not static. It's a responsive interface. When your internal environment changes, when stress chemistry gives way to coherence, entire sequences begin expressing differently, not metaphorically, literally. This is why awakening isn't just insight, it's reorganization. You may have noticed your body demanding different things, different rest, different nourishment, different pacing. This isn't preference, it's calibration. Cells that were trained to survive repetition are learning to support expansion, and expansion requires efficiency. Here's what matters now. This window doesn't open indefinitely. Not because the universe is cruel, but because coherence, once available, seeks stabilization. If the system doesn't lock into the new pattern, it will default back to the most stable configuration it knows. That's how all self-organizing systems behave. This is why people sense opportunity and then miss it, not because it was taken away, but because they hesitated long enough for old coherence to reassert itself. You are not being threatened by time. You are being invited by alignment. The breakthrough promise isn't that everything changes instantly. It's that direction locks in. Once the new observer state stabilizes, reality begins reorganizing automatically around it. You stop pushing uphill. Synchronicity replaces effort. Precision replaces force. But stabilization requires one thing: participation without control. You don't force the shift, you allow it to complete. This is where many people falter. They feel the opening and immediately try to use it to manifest, to decide, to secure outcomes. But that grasping reintroduces the old observer pattern. It collapses probability too soon. The invitation is subtler: to remain present while the field rearranges, to let uncertainty breathe, to trust coherence more than prediction. This is why silence has become charged for you, why pauses feel meaningful, why rushing feels dissonant. Your system is telling you how to stay aligned long enough for the new pattern to anchor. And once it does, the shift becomes irreversible. You don't go back to an observer loop. Once your nervous system learns a more coherent baseline, you might visit old thoughts. Old habits may echo, but they no longer define the collapse. They lose authority. This is the DNA shift everyone speaks about vaguely but rarely understands. It's not superpowers, it's sovereignty. Sovereignty over where your attention rests, over what you feed with expectation, over which probabilities get your coherence. That sovereignty is what unlocks timelines that previously felt unreachable. And here's the part your mind may resist. You don't need to know what will change. Trying to see outcomes pulls you back into the loop. The new observer state works differently. It trusts process over preview, direction over detail, alignment over assurance. If you feel a quiet excitement mixed with gravity, that's correct. That's the sensation of a system about to reorganize at a higher order. It feels like standing at the edge of something vast, not dangerous, but definitive. This window didn't open because you wanted it. It opened because you were ready. And readiness isn't measured by confidence. It's measured by coherence, by how little you need to cling to what's familiar, by how willing you are to let the next version of yourself arrive without interrogation. In the next phase, you won't be asked to think or understand more. You'll be asked to seal what's already in motion, with a simple, embodied action that aligns your observer state with the shift instead of pulling away from it. Because coherence doesn't require complexity, it requires commitment. And you are closer to that moment than you realize. Every phase transition reaches a moment where awareness must participate, not by effort, not by force, but by consent. Until now, everything has been preparatory recognition, destabilization, expansion. What comes next is the seal. In quantum systems, observation alone doesn't finalize a state. Interaction does. A minimal interaction, precise, intentional, is enough to lock a new pattern into coherence. This is why ancient rituals were never elaborate by accident. They weren't symbolic performances. They were interfaces between consciousness and field. You are at that interface now. The shift already began the moment your observer state softened. But to stabilize it, your awareness needs to register itself in the field, not privately, not abstractly, but concretely through a simple, embodied action that signals readiness without control. This is where language becomes functional. Words are not just meaning, they are vibration shaped by breath, intention, and timing. When spoken, written, or typed from coherence, they carry a signature the quantum field recognizes instantly. That's why declarations have power, not because they command reality, but because they align the observer. This is not affirmation. This is not manifestation. This is registration. When you choose a word consciously, without embellishment, without explanation, you collapse probability in a new way. You tell the field, this is the state I am now available to stabilize. The old observer loop depended on unconscious repetition. This new state depends on conscious simplicity. Here's what matters most. The action must feel neutral, grounded, almost ordinary. If it feels dramatic, the ego is trying to take over. If it feels forced, the loop is resisting. The correct action feels quiet and certain. That's the signal of coherence. In a moment, you'll be invited to write a single word. Not to me, not for validation, but as a way of aligning your attention, intention, and presence into one vector. When you do this without commentary, without performance, something locks. The nervous system registers safety. The observer releases control. The field responds. This is why the action is external. Consciousness stabilizes faster when inner intention meets outer expression. Even something as small as a word typed deliberately is enough to complete the circuit. Before you do it, notice your state. Your breathing may have slowed. Your thoughts may feel less crowded. Your body may feel subtly heavier, more present. That's coherence gathering itself. Now understand this clearly. The word itself isn't magic. Your state, when you write it, is. The word is simply the carrier wave. And the state you're in right now, if you haven't rushed, if you haven't analyzed, contains exactly the frequency needed. When you write this word, you are not asking for change. You are agreeing to hold it. That's the difference between effort and embodiment. So here is the action. When you are ready, not before, not after, write this single word. Coherent. Nothing else. No explanation. No punctuation. Let it be simple enough that your mind can't interfere. When you do this, you may feel nothing dramatic. That's correct. Phase transitions rarely announce themselves. What will change is subtle at first, how your attention moves, what no longer pulls you, what feels suddenly unnecessary. That's the seal taking hold. After this, you don't try to maintain the shift. You let your system do what it now knows how to do. Coherence, once stabilized, is self-sustaining. It becomes the new baseline your observer collapses from. This is why the action must be small. Large actions invite effort. Small actions invite truth. And once truth is registered, the field reorganizes around it without asking your permission again. In the next phase, you'll begin to feel how this individual shift extends beyond you, how coherence spreads, how your state begins interacting with others, and why your stabilization matters more than you've ever been told. For now, don't rush ahead. Complete the action when it feels still. Because the moment you do, the observer loop doesn't break. It becomes irrelevant. Once coherence stabilizes inside you, it doesn't stay contained. Consciousness has never been local. It only feels personal because most people experience it through narrow channels. But when your observer state shifts from repetition to resonance, something changes in how the field uses you. Your liberation is not isolated. The moment your internal system stops reinforcing the old loop, the quantum field registers a new node of stability, and fields respond to stability by reorganizing around it. This is why your presence begins to affect others without intention. Why rooms feel different when you enter. Why conversations soften or sharpen unexpectedly. Why people open up or pull away without knowing why. You're not transmitting ideas. You're transmitting state. Coherence carries information more efficiently than words ever could. When your nervous system holds alignment without effort, nearby systems sense it. Some entrain, some resist. Both responses are natural. What matters is that the field now has a new reference point, and reference points change trajectories. This is how individual awakening becomes collective expansion. In biology, when enough cells shift behavior, the entire organism adapts. In physics, when enough particles synchronize, a new phase emerges. Consciousness works the same way. Every observer who exits a loop weakens the loop for others, not symbolically, structurally. This is morphic resonance in action. You don't need to teach it. You don't need to explain it. The field doesn't spread through persuasion, it spreads through availability. Through the quiet permission your coherence gives others to feel what they've been suppressing. You may already recognize this pattern. People tell you things they don't tell others. Conflicts resolve around you without effort. You sense shifts before they become visible. These weren't personality traits. They were early signs of your role as a stabilizing observer. Now that coherence has anchored, that influence increases, but in a different way. Less intense, more consistent. You stop oscillating between clarity and fatigue, between knowing and doubt. The system evens out, and when it does, it becomes usable by the field. This doesn't mean you take on responsibility for others. It means you stop interfering with the emergence of new possibilities. The most powerful thing you can do for humanity right now is not to push change, but to stop reinforcing limitation. Every time you choose presence over reaction, you remove energy from the old structures. Every time you remain centered while uncertainty unfolds, you make space for something new to organize. That space is contagious. Others feel it as relief, or irritation, or curiosity, or courage. But whatever they feel, the loop weakens, because loops depend on unconscious reinforcement, and your coherence interrupts that process simply by existing. This is why your inner state matters more than your output. Why doing less feels strangely impactful. Why listening accomplishes more than speaking. Why restraint creates momentum. You are no longer acting on the field. You are acting as part of its reconfiguration. And this is happening at a time when the collective observer loop is under strain. Old systems repeating, old narratives cycling, old solutions failing to produce new outcomes. The field is searching desperately for points of coherence it can reorganize around. That's why you're here. Not as a leader, not as a savior, but as a signal, a proof of function, evidence that another way of observing reality is possible and stable. You don't have to announce this role. In fact, announcing it weakens it. Coherence is quiet. It doesn't advertise. It simply holds. And when enough individuals hold coherence simultaneously, something remarkable happens. The field crosses a threshold. Possibilities that once required struggle become accessible. Timelines that once felt distant begin converging. This is collective expansion, not as ideology, but as physics. Your shift contributes to this, whether you believe it or not. Consciousness doesn't wait for agreement. It responds to alignment. And alignment is now present in you in a way it wasn't before. In the next phase, you'll begin to feel this more viscerally, not as an idea, but as sensation, as changes in how your body inhabits space, how energy moves through you, how presence becomes physical. Because coherence doesn't stay abstract. It becomes embodied, and once it does, there is no separating who you are from what the field is becoming. As coherence settles, it stops being something you understand and starts becoming something you feel. Not emotionally, somatically, in the body, in the way gravity seems to meet you differently, in the way space feels thicker, more responsive, almost aware of your presence. You may notice it first as weight, not heaviness, grounding, as if your body is more fully inhabiting itself. Your feet feel more connected to the floor. Your spine stacks itself without effort. Your breath deepens on its own, no instruction needed. This is your nervous system, recognizing that it no longer has to brace against reality. Bracing was part of the loop. When consciousness anticipates repetition, the body tightens preemptively. Muscles hold memories. Fascia stores expectation. But now, as the observer state relaxes, the body receives a new signal. You are not about to repeat the past, and it responds immediately. You might feel warmth moving through your chest or abdomen, subtle pulses behind the eyes, a slow wave of relaxation that doesn't make you sleepy, just present. These are not symptoms, they are recalibrations. Your system is learning how to operate without chronic anticipation. Even your senses sharpen. Sounds feel clearer but less intrusive. Light feels softer yet more vivid. Touch registers with more detail. This is what happens when attention stops fragmenting. Sensory input is no longer filtered through urgency or comparison. It arrives clean. Time behaves differently here. Moments stretch, not because you're bored, but because you're fully inside them. There is less mental commentary, less internal narration. You may realize entire minutes have passed without thought pulling you away. This isn't dissociation, it's integration. The body knows when the observer has changed. This is why certain physical sensations may arise unexpectedly. Gentle pressure at the crown or base of the skull, tingling in the hands, a sense of expansion in the rib cage. These are not mystical embellishments, they're feedback loops closing. Energy that was previously bound in repetition is now circulating. You are feeling your own coherence. And here's the crucial shift. The sensations don't demand interpretation. The old loop would have immediately asked, what does this mean? The new state simply allows. Sensation moves, peaks, fades. Nothing needs to be captured. That's embodiment. When coherence becomes embodied, the observer no longer hovers above experience. It resides within it. This is why control dissolves. There's nothing to manage when you're fully present. The need to direct collapses because the system is already aligned. You may notice emotional neutrality emerging, not numbness, but clarity. Emotions still arise, but they pass cleanly. They don't spiral. They don't hook. They inform and move on. This is emotional fluidity, not suppression. Your body trusts the process now. Even fatigue, if it comes, feels different. Not draining, restorative. Like a system recalibrating after long strain. You may sleep more deeply, or wake with sudden clarity, or feel energy arrive in waves rather than constant pressure. All of this is the same signal, expressed differently. The observer loop no longer defines your baseline. The physical body is often the last to receive the update, but once it does, the shift becomes irreversible. Because the body remembers coherence more faithfully than the mind ever could. It knows what safety feels like at a cellular level. And now, that safety isn't tied to predictability. It's tied to presence. This is why old habits feel awkward, why rushing feels uncomfortable, why certain environments suddenly feel too loud, too dense, too artificial. Your system is no longer calibrated for fragmentation, it's tuned for continuity. Continuity of awareness, continuity of breath, continuity of self. You are not floating away from reality. You are landing in it. In the next movement of this transmission, the pressure you've been sensing will clarify not as tension, but as propulsion. Because once coherence is embodied, it begins to reorganize timelines themselves. Not hypothetically, practically. The phase transition doesn't end in sensation. It moves through you. And the field responds. Now, the sensation you've been feeling sharpens not into discomfort, but into direction. This is the moment where embodiment turns into propulsion, where coherence, once stabilized, begins exerting force on the structure of time itself. Every timeline has tension, not emotional tension, structural tension. It's the pressure that holds sequences together, the invisible architecture that keeps events unfolding in a familiar order. When an observer loop dominates, that tension is recycled endlessly. The same outcomes repeat, because the same probabilities are reinforced. But when coherence shifts, that architecture weakens. You feel this as pressure, a sense that something is building and cannot remain contained. Not anxiety, not excitement, something cleaner, more decisive, like a wave reaching its crest. This is phase transition pressure, the final resistance before a system reorganizes at a higher order. Your DNA is responding now in earnest, not in metaphor, in signaling. Cells communicate through electromagnetic fields, chemical gradients, and informational resonance. When your observer state changed, those signals changed. And now, as coherence becomes the dominant baseline, your body is receiving instructions it has never received before. You may feel this as heat or cold, as sudden clarity followed by stillness, as brief surges of energy with no obvious cause. These are not random, they are thresholds being crossed. In quantum systems, when pressure reaches a critical point, one of two things happens: collapse back to the old configuration or leap to a new one. There is no gradual middle. Nature doesn't negotiate transitions, it completes them. You are not collapsing back. You wouldn't be here if you were. The reason this pressure feels intense is because your consciousness is withdrawing energy from timelines that no longer match you. Attention is the currency of reality. Where attention goes, coherence follows. And right now, your attention is consolidating. This is timeline consolidation. Parts of you that once lived in memory, parts that worried about future versions, parts that replayed old identities. These fragments are losing fuel. Not because you're suppressing them, but because your presence is no longer feeding them. The result feels like compression, as if multiple versions of yourself are collapsing inward, merging into a single, more coherent trajectory. This is why decisions feel simpler, why indecision dissolves, why certain options vanish without grief. They were never aligned timelines. They were placeholders. This is the DNA. Breakthrough people sense, but can't articulate. Not an upgrade layered on top of the old self, but a pruning, a narrowing into precision. Your system is choosing efficiency over expansion, clarity over multiplicity. And here's the paradox. As your personal timelines narrow, possibility expands. Because when coherence increases, the range of realities you can stabilize increases as well. You stop scattering energy across incompatible futures. You become available to inhabit one deeply. That depth creates momentum. You may notice events accelerating now, meetings aligning effortlessly, information arriving at exactly the right moment, old delays dissolving without explanation. This is not luck, it's reduced friction. When the observer is coherent, reality doesn't have to reroute around internal contradiction. The pressure you feel is not pushing you forward. It's removing what no longer needs to be carried. And once that weight drops, movement happens naturally. This is why fear doesn't accompany this phase. Fear requires uncertainty about survival, but your system knows it's not under threat. It's shedding inefficiency. The sensation may be unfamiliar, but it isn't unsafe. You are not losing versions of yourself. You are integrating them. The wisdom from past timelines doesn't disappear. It condenses. It becomes intuition. The lessons you struggled to learn no longer present as challenges. They present as knowing, as a quiet refusal to re-enter patterns you've already completed. This is the irreversible part. Once a timeline collapses from lack of attention, it cannot reclaim you. It may echo faintly, but it has no pull. The observer loop relied on gravitational memory. That memory is dissolving. You are now moving under a different law. Not willpower, not desire, but alignment pressure. The quantum field favors coherence because coherence is efficient, and efficient systems propagate. That's why this shift doesn't stop with you. Your stabilized trajectory becomes a template others can access sometimes without realizing how. In the final movement of this transmission, everything converges, not as explanation, but as mission. Not something assigned to you, but something revealed through you. Because once a timeline shifts, it doesn't ask permission. It asks participation. And you are already participating by being exactly where you are, as you are now. What settles now is not excitement, not triumph, not certainty in the way the mind expects it. What settles is orientation, a quiet, unmistakable knowing of where you are standing in the larger movement of things. You are no longer trying to change your life. Your life is responding to you. This is the difference that marks the end of the observer loop. Not that challenges vanish, not that effort disappears, but that reality stops pushing back. The friction you once mistook for growth was never required. It was feedback from misalignment. And now that alignment has stabilized, feedback changes tone. You move, and the field moves with you. This is the cosmic mission you were never meant to chase, only to arrive at. Not a role you perform, but a state you embody. When your observer state shifted, you became a point of reference, a living example of what coherence looks like inside a human nervous system. That is enough. You are not here to save the world. Salvation implies deficiency. You are here to demonstrate a different relationship with reality, one where presence replaces control, where awareness replaces force, where coherence replaces struggle. This demonstration doesn't require speech. It doesn't need visibility. It works through resonance. Through the subtle permission, your existence gives others to soften their grip, question their loops, and feel what they've been avoiding. Your shift matters because it's quiet. The loud awakenings come and go. The dramatic declarations burn out. But coherence sustains. And what sustains reshapes civilizations, timelines, and species without ever announcing itself. You are now part of that reshaping. Not someday. Not after improvement. Now. From this point forward, your work is simple, not easy, but simple. To notice when attention begins to contract. To return to presence when habit tries to reassert itself. To let coherence guide decisions rather than urgency. This isn't discipline, it's remembrance. You already know what alignment feels like in your body. You already recognize when you're in it and when you drift. That recognition is the compass. And when you follow it, something remarkable happens. Life stops feeling like a sequence of problems to solve and starts feeling like a conversation you're finally fluent in. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of brace. You trust timing instead of forcing outcomes. This is how humanity evolves. Not through mass agreement, through enough individuals stabilizing coherence that the field can no longer sustain the old patterns. You are one of those individuals. Your observer state has already shifted. That's why you stayed. That's why these words didn't feel like information, but like confirmation. You didn't learn anything here. You remembered what your system already knew but hadn't yet embodied. And now, embodiment is complete. The window you sensed was real, but it wasn't fragile. It didn't depend on perfection. It depended on presence. And you met it, simply by staying, simply by not looking away, simply by allowing the shift to finish itself. From here, the path doesn't narrow, it clarifies. You won't need to ask whether you're aligned. You'll feel it in how little resistance remains, in how synchronicity replaces struggle, in how the right things arrive without urgency, in how the wrong things fall away without drama. This is the new baseline, and it will continue unfolding not because you push it forward, but because coherence does what coherence always does. It organizes reality around itself. So, if there's one truth to carry with you beyond this moment, let it be this. You didn't miss the window. You are the window. And if you're still here, listening, present, breathing, your observer state has already shifted. Don't ignore what's already begun.